Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Marketplace Masters. Today's session is focused on a topic that many brands really struggle with when they first start working with Amazon, and that's understanding how Amazon actually thinks. Many sales directors and account managers are incredibly experienced working with major retailers like Tesco, Woolworths, Coles, or Bunnings here in Australia. But when they start working with Amazon, they quickly discover that the same playbook doesn't necessarily work. In fact, Amazon has a very different mindset when it comes to decision making, vendor relationships, and how it goes about growing categories. Now, to help unpack that today, I am joined today by Benjamin Boschinski, founder of Vendor Launch, a marketing agency specifically for Amazon vendors. Now, Benjamin used to work at Amazon as an AVS brand specialist in the retail team, and he worked at Amazon for almost 3 years, after which he left to start a business selling surf wax and repairing wetsuits on the northern beaches of Sydney, Australia. As a former Amazon AVS brand specialist, he saw firsthand how frustrating and difficult it was for vendors to navigate the platform and how much money some vendors were actually leaving on the table. This unique perspective really led him to build a marketing agency dedicated to solving exactly those type of problems. So in today's conversation, we're going to talk about the Amazon mindset, how Amazon vendors should think about working with Amazon, and also do a little dive into Amazon Vendor Services, or AVS, and whether it's actually worth it for vendors in markets like Australia. Benjamin, it is absolutely fantastic to have you on the show with us today.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the warm intro.
I must say, as I went through your intro, there is obviously a question there about, what happened to your surf business, right? The surf wax and the wetsuits. So are you still running that as well, or is that getting less and less love these days?
No, so the surf wax is quite short-lived, but it was, lots of learnings for sure. The business didn't kind of take off. So I moved on to the wetsuits, which also didn't work, but for completely different reasons. Lots of learnings, but then I stumbled upon the AVS, or the vendor launch, which in hindsight was right under my nose the whole time, given that I'd spent the last almost 3 years working at Amazon. But it's never a straight line, I guess.
No, never is. Although it's kind of, once everything comes together, it's like really obvious. I've got a couple of those stories as well, but I won't bore our audience with that now. All right, well, let's talk about Amazon, right? You've worked inside Amazon and now as vice brands. So maybe a good place to start is, what do you see as the largest misconception or misconceptions that traditional retail teams have when they start working with Amazon? And particularly in the context of Amazon vendor, of course, that's kind of the overarching theme here.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's a great question. I think to backtrack, so, I've kind of been on both sides of the fence. So I've worked at Amazon, inside of Amazon, and also now on the vendor side, on the other side of the fence. And I think one of the biggest things is vendors, particularly more established, companies, they treat Amazon as kind of any other retailer, when in actual fact they shouldn't. It's completely different. And I think there's a couple of things that stem from that. So firstly, they kind of think Amazon cares about the vendor relationship, when in actual fact, from Amazon's perspective, it's more of a numbers game. There's just so many vendors. Each product comes down to a barcode, an ASIN number. It's a more objective, number-based kind of approach. For example, with a traditional retailer, maybe there's more of a relationship you have to build. You have to convince the buyer. It's more subjective. But on Amazon, it's more of a numbers game. And I think that's probably kind of one of the biggest differences. It really should impact on like how you take the approach. It should be very different. With traditional retailers, the suppliers might want to build a relationship. They might want to get in front of them and tell them the story of their product and then the effort they put into it. But on Amazon, it's just an objective numbers game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely resonates. I spent many years at Coles actually talking to probably hundreds of suppliers, and you're right about, hey, they want to get in front of you. They want to They want to put their product in front of you. They want to tell the wonderful story, and obviously that's different when it comes to Amazon, which sort of leads me into kind of the relationship angle, right? And we'll probably get onto it a little bit longer, but how important is that relationship? It's very important in a lot of offline retail still today. I think many retailers don't like to admit that, but it's certainly true. But when it comes to building relationships with Amazon, what's different there, particularly bringing back that mindset piece as well.
Yeah, sure. So I think like vendors should understand that Amazon's approach is data driven, which means like it's more of a democratic kind of process, right? If the numbers support, if the customer wants the product, it will sell, Amazon will buy it, right? You don't really have to convince anyone to buy the product. Like I understand in like traditional retailers, for them kind of like if they're bringing on a new product, it also means they're getting rid of another product, right? At the core of it, they have a set shelf space, whereas Amazon effectively has unlimited shelf space, right? Like there's, they can almost add an infinite number of products, particularly, if they're not holding the inventory in their warehouse, which is possible through programs like drop shipping and all that. But at the core of it, they effectively have an almost unlimited shelf space, right? So with a vendor manager at Amazon will always, more often than not, will want more products. Whereas with a traditional retail model, the buyer kind of has to make that decision, because if they're taking on a new product, they're effectively removing an old one. So I think that's kind of probably one of the more foundational kind of differences. And so suppliers, they might be used to like a traditional retailer where there's more of a collaborative relationship, where they want to like get in front of the buyer, they want to show them the product, they want to feel them the product, they want to touch it. Whereas with Amazon, it's a bit different. Like I'll give you an example. So when I worked at Amazon, one of the vendors that we worked with flew us out to their warehouse, and even now we have like clients that work with us that invite us to their office, to their warehouse, to showcase, for example, if there's a new product launch, right? If they're going to launch a new product, they want us to see it, they want us to look at it. But from Amazon's perspective, it's like, does that matter? If the customer wants it, great, right? Put it on Amazon, and then let the customer decide, right? The buyer, the vendor manager at Amazon doesn't really have to make, there's much less subjectivity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, which gets us more to the like, what are the factors? What's the approach by which Amazon buyers really make decisions whether to range something or not? Like you're right. Like I know the retail side very well, right? There's a planogram. Want to know the story. Exclusivity can be important. You want to make sure it's not duplicating the range. There's customer choice, all of that. But Amazon's different. You're saying they're essentially, they don't have to deal with one in, one out type arrangement when it comes to physical shelf space. There's some restrictions, I guess, around the warehouse, but their considerations are really different. What are the key kind of metrics and factors that an Amazon buyer will sort of go through in their mind to evaluate, hey, whether this product is worth ranging or not?
Yeah, sure. So Amazon's approach, generally speaking, it's customer driven. So they work backwards from what the customer wants. Now, probably their most important metric is selection, is just ranging products. If a product is being sold by competitor retailers, they'll want that product. So if you're a supplier, you should also kind of leverage that, right? If you're about to add a product which other retailers are, you're currently selling to other retailers, know that Amazon wants that as well. It's probably part of their KPIs to range that product or that range. So definitely leverage that. But yeah, competitor like retailers ranging products, that's obviously a factor. But then also like profitability, ASP, which stands for average selling price. It's a metric that Amazon vendor managers track, especially as the market matures and they need to make it more sustainable from their end. And they start looking at selling price of products, profitability. Are they actually kind of making more money on those products? They look further down the P&L. So it's a range of those things. But I think at the core of it, it's like it's customer driven. It's what the customer wants. And And then also that kind of feeds into another element, which is suppliers should care about sell out. So what Amazon is selling to customers, not only what they're buying from you. I think going back to that, like, misconceptions is a lot of vendors or suppliers think, I'll just get Amazon to raise the PO for the new product. I'll get it into their warehouse and then it stops. That's it. But the actual fact is, like, Amazon's not going to sell your product for you. In fact, probably less so than other retailers, where you really have to be more concerned to get Amazon to sell to the customer, as opposed to them just ordering it from you.
Yeah, no, I think I remember many situations where, hey, the product is in Coles' warehouse. It's now Coles' problem, right? Although, I think over the years, Coles got better at, trying to get suppliers to do that. But you're right, like Amazon is you have to do the marketing, the content, you have to drive it, all of those things, right? What are they, just comparing and contrasting, those sort of traditional retailers, let's call them, bricks and mortar or the like, versus Amazon? I mean, what are some of the strategies that you feel like actually they tend to work pretty well in the offline world, but when it comes to Amazon, they just don't work. They don't translate. Are there things that you got? I keep seeing, clients or vendors trying to do the same tricks and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two components. The first is related to ranging. I think a lot of suppliers are used to the fact that maybe the retailers won't range all of their products. They might only range some. Again, going back to that limited shelf space. But on Amazon, you really should include a wider range of your products. And obviously, you need to make money, right? Don't range products you're losing money on. But for the most part, suppliers should range more than less. You should add more products. So I think that's kind of the first difference. And then the second is, like, being concerned with that sellout, being concerned with where, like, your merchandising, your marketing, trade spend's going. Like in a physical retailer, you might have like tastings, you might have like store merchandising, POS, point of sale, like banners, that kind of stuff. Obviously on Amazon, it's completely different. And I'd say the most important thing is advertising, is running paid ads to get your product in front of more customers, to advertise it against relevant keywords. And that way you kind of grow the business that way.
Yeah. Is there anything, I'm going to ask a very specific question here, but, in retailers, it's very common as part of, a ranging strategy, then the supplier may give you some straights or some what do you call it, launch support money, and then return the retailer may feature you in their catalog, or they're going to put you on a gondola end for a few weeks. So in other words, you can sort of negotiate kind of launch support, and the retailer, obviously, subject to ROI, will come to the party. With Amazon, clearly, you have to do a lot of these things yourself, like advertising and the like. But are there things that Amazon can do to help your products launch on Amazon? And I guess, what are the things? Are there things that vendors should be asking for when they talk about ranging products in MPD?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, sure, the vendor managers, they can support with things like banners on the page, things like that. To be completely honest, I have found the greatest lever of driving sales, there's two things. There's promotions, and then there's advertising. And advertising, probably the most important lever. The thing to understand is advertising is separate from your vendor manager's P&L, right? So if you're investing $10,000 a month in ads, that's $10,000 a month your vendor manager isn't getting. It isn't going directly towards their P&L. The retail kind of buyer side of Amazon is completely different from advertising. So that's something to be aware of in terms of like incentives. But again, like I'd say vendor managers, really useful just getting the product range, looking after the commercials. It has to make sense for Amazon as well. There's no use kind of neglecting that. Obviously, it has to make sense for the supplier as well. Once you've got the product up and running and you've got stock, in Amazon's warehouse, no operational issues, Amazon are buying the product, there's a forecast, really most efforts are kind of shift towards that advertising side of things.
Yeah. Look, that's such a good point, particularly pointing around the fact that they're kind of almost two different worlds.
Yeah.
Make sure that you keep your budget aside for advertising. Don't give it all to the vendor manager and then, expect them to advertise because they're not going to. Yeah, that's really good. I was going to ask about the question of content, right? I mean, again, let's draw the parallel, right? If I'm ranging a product at Kohl's, typically I will supply some images where in most cases, Kohl's may even do their own photography. They will create the shelf talkers, the banners, the catalog pictures, the digital flybys campaigns. All of that is done by, the retailer in many instances. With Amazon, particularly when it comes to content, I know we've spoken about advertising, but when it comes to like the product display pages, as an example, right? I know on the seller side, it's 100% the responsibility of the seller, right? But for vendor, how does that interaction between the vendor, and the vendor manager on the Amazon, who creates the content, who's responsible for it?
Yeah, great question. So it also falls within the vendor side. And again, this goes back to the fact that like Amazon will not sell your product for you. It is the responsibility of the vendor to make sure all of this is sorted. And that means making sure that your products have images and they're accurate. It falls in the vendors, making sure you have a brand store. All of that does help drive sales. And then arguably it's significantly more important than with traditional retailers because, again, customers can't touch your product. It's the images that do the selling. You have to communicate the benefits of your product, how it's being used, so it's really important, and it falls really within the vendor to do that.
Yeah, don't wait for Amazon. I know I have seen cases where, particularly in the early stages of relationship, Amazon will try and pitch in and do some of that. But often it's not even like 10 out of 10 type content, right? It's almost like the bare minimum just to get the listing live. Which may not, result in sort of great ranking and the like. Okay, well, let's take it up a level, right? Like we've spoken about products and getting product range, but like let's say the products have been ranged, the relationship's going. Like, how does Amazon look at the broader relationship, right? In terms of particularly, how do they evaluate success, right? You as a vendor, let's say we've been doing business for a year, like, how does Amazon evaluate your performance, and how do they think about whether you're like a brand that they want to continue to partner with and grow versus actually, things not working out that well? Like, what's the mindset there?
Yeah, sure. So your vendor manager will have a series of KPIs that they're assessed on for each vendor. And so these KPIs include like ranging, so selection. So again, if there's products which are being ranged in other retailers that are not being ranged at Amazon, red flag internally, that's what they'll go after. So that's the first piece, is selection. Now, obviously, each vendor manages a P&L, so they are also KPI'd on like top line revenue growth. So are the vendors growing? Is the category growing? That sales figure, and then also like margin. So Amazon vendor managers refer to that as net PPM, which I believe stands for net pure product margin. And so that's kind of the main margin figure that they kind of look at. Now, the other thing to note is, depending on the size of the marketplace and where it is in that trajectory, is it a new emerging market, for example, Ireland or Australia versus the US, they typically look at different KPIs which weigh more heavily. And so what that means is, as the market grows, they typically look after more profitability, more margin-based, look further down the P&L, because at that point, they need to make money. At the start, when Amazon launches in a new market, they probably range anything regardless of how much money they lose or make. But yeah, as it matures, they typically look more towards profitability, which is what many vendors in Australia are currently, I'm sure, experiencing.
I was actually going to ask you, from Australian point, you obviously have a very unique lens on the Australian landscape here. I remember, 7-8 years ago, after Amazon just launched, it was all about range and selection, right? Get any products, it's in JB Hi-Fi, we have to have it. If it's in how has that evolved, and how have you seen priority shift on the vendor side when it comes to Amazon Australia?
Yeah. So again, as you mentioned at the start, it was like, let's just range everything, all products, regardless of whether it makes money. But as it matures and as it grows, they start looking at profitability. So now it's more looking at profitability. Are they making money? on each of the products. And then the other really important metric that they consider is called ASP, stands for average selling price. Again, looking at, as the name suggests, the selling price of the product. So if products are very low ASP, they might not be as keen to range them and sell them, just because, if it costs $7 to ship a product, you're not exactly making a lot of money on a $5 packet of chips. So yeah, ASP becomes important where they start to kind of more prioritize, or look more at bulk listings, kind of larger pack sizes, and kind of looking at that side of things.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, look, I think the point on ASP is so valid. Like, I don't know what the threshold is these days, but I remember doing some analysis, I think over 5 years ago, where I think it said something like, even on the seller side, if it's below $20, like, and it's sort of a standard type product, it's not like a greeting card or something that has some sort of favorable economics, then actually it's just not worth doing, because once you add up all the costs of logistics and the like. So let me obviously we don't have that much time left, but I want to get into AVS, right? Because you've spent many years at AVS here in Australia. Maybe let's just start, before I go with my more specific ones. Like, for those of the audience that don't really understand AVS, maybe you can just explain, what is it? What does it entail? And what does it sort of cost from a budget point of view?
Yeah. So AVS stands for Amazon Vendor Services. I believe it used to be called SVS, Strategic Vendor Services in the US. But essentially, it's a paid program that Amazon will pitch to vendors, where as part of this program, you get an account manager, I guess, someone internally at Amazon that works under your vendor manager, and they kind of help grow the account. They help with the day-to-day operations. So it's kind of like having someone internally at Amazon kind of vouch or can help you with your account. That's the very high level.
No. Well, I was going to ask. Because I've spoken a lot about AVS in these episodes, but usually more in the context of very established markets like the US or the UK, and it's become a really increasing topic as a substitute for the vendor managers who seem to have disappeared. So in the very mature market where Amazon operates, Amazon's certainly trying to drive efficiency, reduce sort of the ratio of vendor managers to vendors, and as a result, AVS is now looked on as sort of an alternative to having a vendor manager. But I think that situation is a little bit different in emerging markets or growing markets like Australia, for example. So my question really is around, what's the role of AVS in a market where you're sort of growing, where Amazon is an emerging channel? It's not like the largest channel that you serve. How can AVS really complement and accelerate your business?
Yeah, sure. So the first thing to understand is, like, vendor managers, if you're a supplier, you probably run into the scenario where your vendor manager isn't responding to you, where you've asked a question and they don't get back to you for weeks, if ever. And look, the thing is, like, a vendor manager probably has 15 accounts, 20 accounts. So they're not as involved in the day-to-day. If a particular product price has been an issue, like, they can't kind of delve into the weeds of it on a day-to-day. So that's where an AVS can potentially come in. They're supporting the vendor manager in a sense. You can think of them almost as an employee of the vendor manager. So, and they typically handle maybe like 5 accounts, right? So it's a lot more depth in each individual account compared to the vendor manager. And the idea is that they will support your growth. Now, in practice, what that means in markets like Australia, like, it's probably more of an operational place. Your AVS will look at things like your confirmation rate, how many orders are you confirming, how many are you shipping, what is the time it takes for you to ship products from your warehouse to Amazon's. The sooner you can ship, the more sales you'll get. So things like that. They look at that kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, how the accounts are tracking, the operational metrics. They're also there to help with, like, executing. So if you're setting up a promotion, they can help set that up. They can help add, kind of categorize it. They can help with merchandising. So they can help kind of more with the day-to-day. But arguably, what's probably more important to understand is they don't help, and this is the case on all markets, They don't help with advertising. So as I mentioned, advertising is a separate kind of area, separate division. So they don't help with advertising. But the operational side they do help with, and they are also KPI on similar things to your vendor manager. So it is kind of mutually the incentives are all similar. Everyone wants to grow the account, and they kind of help with that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Whenever I talk to kind of my clients around AVS, I got very mixed responses, right? And it seems to be like a lot of the, I mean, I sort of summarize it as you need to manage the resource actively, right? You can't just assume that they're going to, it's like you have to manage them like you do any team member, right? And actually, a lot of time it comes back to make them feel like you're part of your team and treat them as such and all of that. I wanted to ask you, you're having this unique perspective. What advice would you have, particularly in the context of emerging markets like Australia, for a brand to get the most out of their AVS brand specialist, right? How do you best manage that relationship so that you're really satisfied? I mean, this service is not free. There's quite a lot of funds attached to it. How do you get a good ROI on that?
Yeah. So yeah, as you kind of mentioned, the first thing is they're not going to fix everything for you. They're not going to fix your business for you. They are a resource, and in some cases it's it can be very helpful. In other cases it can't. But yeah, you have to kind of understand that you should be proactive. You should come up with initiatives as well, and you kind of get out what you put in, just like most things in life, I guess. So yeah, making sure just being proactive, having initiatives that you want to work on, things, any ideas that you want to put forward, making sure that you're raising them. I think a lot of brands they're a bit more reactive. They don't kind of come up with them. They just kind of come to the meetings, wait for the AVS to do everything. But you're not going to get the most out of it. So I would say be proactive, track tasks, track projects that you're working on. And then try and understand if things don't get done, the AVS has a manager, an AVS team lead, ideally ask to be introduced to them, build a relationship with them as well, and just kind of understand where the AVS fits in. What are the other kind of departments at Amazon? There's an in-stock team, right, that looks at buying, supply team, and AVS will have a relationship with them. So try and kind of understand the different teams, and then work with the AVS, potentially get introduced to them. Just have more of a proactive approach.
Yeah, for sure. That's great advice. Thanks, Ben. Last question from me. Actually, I might have to throw another one, but last question before I give it to our audience. We do have a couple of questions coming in. It's also a prompter. Anyone, we've got about 5 minutes left, so if you do want to ask Ben a question, now's a good time. In terms of for brands that are operating in newer Amazon markets, I mean, we already spoke about the fact that Amazon priorities will change as it matures and as it establishes itself in different markets. But let's talk about newer Amazon markets. Australia, Ireland, South Africa, Belgium, some of the others where Amazon's really launched in the last couple of years. As a vendor, what do you feel are the most important things to focus on? Right? There's so many. Amazon is a complex beast. You could focus on 10 or probably 100 different things, but in your experience, in the context of a growing and a new and a growing market, what are the most important things that vendors should focus on?
Yeah, I think overall it comes down to just learning. It's the first, if you can learn how Amazon works sooner than your competitors, you'll be positioned quite well. So learning, do you need to advertise, building out an internal advertising team, merchandising, how adding products, just learning how it works. I think that's probably the most important thing. And then figuring out how Amazon is different from the other retailers you supply to. And then in the first, as I mentioned before, ranging, getting products added, that's super important. And if you understand that at the start, Amazon isn't really concerned as much with profitability as, say, in 10 years' time, then you can probably leverage that to sell products that maybe in the future you might not. But yeah, understanding that. And then obviously advertising, starting to advertise. Because again, look, if you've been advertising on Amazon for 3 years, you have a team built out for it, whereas none of your competitors have, in 3 years' time, when everyone's like, oh, Amazon's pretty big now, we need to start advertising, you'll be 3 years ahead. You'll know like how media buying works. You'll know how many like resources to dedicate it to it. You know, like what ad spend you're spending, what your return at, your ROAS as your metrics, and how you've kind of like positioned your team.
Yeah, that's really great advice. There's so much vendors can do right now. It's almost like I would always add to that is find a peer that operates in a very mature Amazon market as a vendor manager, so that you can exchange ideas in terms of what the future is going to look like maybe in 5 to 10 years time. So you can almost work backwards and say, what are the capabilities you can already build? You know, I remember simple things like very few vendors at the start were advertising, because it's like it's a new skill, it's all too hard, too difficult. But actually, the CPCs were just so affordable, right? And in Australia, I know that they still are relative to some other markets, right? So it's just not as much competition. So if you're in there and really leading the pack, you can really build your asset and drive your sales, and there's a disproportionate advantage, really. So very good. Okay, we're almost out of time. I've got a question from one of our audience here from. Let me have a look. Let me bring it up here. Yep, from Gerard. I'm just going to bring it on screen here, and I'll read it out to you as well. It's quite a long question. But Gerard, thanks again for your question. He's a regular contributor to our shows. Appreciate that. Hey, Gerard asks, from your time at Amazon, Ben, was there ever a moment where vendors misunderstood what Amazon cared about most? I'll be interested in an example where maybe the vendor thought one thing really was important to Amazon, but actually Amazon was judging something completely different, right? Just a sort of mismatch about priorities and what's important. Maybe have a think for a couple of seconds, but love to understand if there's something that comes to mind.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think it comes down to like that ranging piece at the start. So we worked with a vendor once that they put in a bunch of this effort trying to convince us to range this new kind of series of products, this new line they were launching. And so like they fly us out, they like show us, they taste test things, you know, that they kind of sell it to us. Whereas Amazon, you know, are thinking like, we'll list a product. There's no issues with us adding the product, right? Instead, that vendor should have been more concerned than selling that product to customers through advertising, for example. And so if they took those resources and just applied it to ads, they would probably kind of had more results. So that was an example where, like, and I get it, like other retailers where they probably do need to spend time, resources, effort, convincing the buyers, making a case for it. But Amazon, it's different. The vendor manager would. It's more democratic. You don't need to ask anyone's permission. Essentially, is what I'm trying to say. You can just pretty much load a product.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate your question, Gerard. I have one as well that I'm really curious about, and let me just see if it actually works. I'm just going to pop them in the screen here so we can actually bring it up. Here we go. There we go. I mean, this is probably unique to some markets, right? But Australia, like other markets, is what we call like a high-low market, right? And particularly vendors are really good at working with all the bricks and mortar retailers, particularly in grocery, right? You know, these 2 weeks it's Woolworths' turn, and they've got this product on half price, and then after that it's Woolworths' turn, and then it's Metcash, and then, you know, and there's sort of happy coexistence, right? That doesn't work that well with Amazon, because Amazon's a price follower, and they see a low price, they'll match, right? They see another low price and they match, and as a result, your price is low all the time. And this is one of the sort of dilemmas that often comes up in the context of a market or a category that tends to be sort of high-low pricing in terms of promotion. So my question to you, Ben, it's a bit of a complex one, but do you run into this issue a lot still these days? And if you do, like, do you have any strategies or thoughts on how to best manage this?
Yeah. So yeah, very good question. Very pertinent in today's age. But the first thing to understand, Amazon, they will match the pricing of other retailers. Like in Australia, Coles, Woolworths, they will match the pricing. So if your product is in promotion in Coles, Woolworths, Amazon will match it. That's how their pricing algorithm works. They will never undercut. They will never go below that, but they will match. And so if you're an established brand working with a vendor manager, it's important to understand that. And I think it comes down to like working with your vendor manager, being like mindful that they have a margin target, your vendor manager does. And so if they're going to be matching, other, Coles, Woolworths, that they're going to take a hit to that margin if it's unfunded. So yeah, I think it's about working with your vendor manager, having that kind of close relationship, and then when needed, supporting the vendor manager, with funding if need be, just to make sure it's worthwhile for them as well.
Awesome. That's great. Hey, Ben, thank you so much. We're out of time. We're going to have to wrap it up. But I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today, sharing your insights. And, for me personally, I think one of the biggest takeaways from this session is in this conversation is really success with Amazon really requires that different mindset. If you're certainly coming from that bricks and mortar world, be open to thinking about things differently, and that may be hard if you've been doing something for like 20 years. But the quicker you get it, right, the more of an advantage you'll have over your competitors in the same category. So I think that's a really, really important point. But yeah, so Ben, really want to thank you for your time today. I usually ask if anyone's tuning into this live or watching the on-demand episode after, and they want to they're based in Australia and they want to pick up a conversation with you around some of these topics, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, great question. So LinkedIn, probably the best. Quite active there, so just send a message and get back to you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks for your time, Ben. Really appreciate it.
Perfect. Thanks for your time as well.
All right, everyone. That is it for today's episode. We're doing one of these live every single week. So if you're looking for more great content, feel free to head to our website, merchantspring.io, go to the resources section. You will find over 150 different episodes covering topics just like these. And of course, we are back next week where we're going to be talking to Hamish from Sell Global about what does it take to build an Amazon agency for the long term. He's just celebrated of being in business for 10 years, and I'm going to quiz him about all the mistakes he's made along the way, but also all the things he's got right and has enabled him to be in the position that he is in today. So make sure you look out for that session as well. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.